Today we want to talk all about placemaking, just kind of go through what it is, and then specifically what we're doing, what we want to get out of it, and kind of look at how it manifests. This sums up what last week was about. This idea of overcoming the grid, overcoming isolation, and coming together, and now we're trying to figure out what exactly this means. Like, what are we looking at? What is this? And I want to kind of try and define what is placemaking throughout this whole evening, which, as we started last week, can happen like over and over again. So we'll be going through a lot of definitions. But firstly, before we answer what is placemaking, I feel like we should talk about the more simplified question of what is a place. What makes a place? And there are a handful of definitions for this. But I'm going to give a really concise one that I've enjoyed, and that is a place is a location invested with value. That'd be like bare bones example. A place is a location invested with value, or embedded with value, and infused with value. All those words. And that's important. And at first it doesn't seem like that much, but in terms of human expression and the beauty of expression and kind of beauty in many ways, you could, the like train of thought that I really enjoy, riding upon, is that if you think about poetry, poetry could be considered simply words, but with this meaning that's been invested in it. They're more than just words. And when you hear those words, you get more than just the definitions of those words. There's this value that's been created by the poet. It creates something more. Music could be like sound. You hear sounds all around you. But what turns sound into music? This structure, this passion, this love, this value, this meaning. And so a place is a location, an area that's been invested with the same sense of value and meaning. And I think it's very interesting to note, this is something that's possibly been forgotten in many regards, is that the value of place is not necessarily, and probably not most importantly, physical. That many times the strongest, the deepest, and the most important value of a place is not physical. It kind of exists beyond actual form, and it almost actually it exists within us, and it exists within the collection around it, which is going to become more important when we start talking about how community plays a role in placemaking. But it's important, and we're also going to talk more about intangible values. So a lot of the value in things is intangible. It's the value that we give it, and the value that we share with others, and the value of something that we accept from someone else. The first way I kind of got onto this train of thought was remembering, like, when I was a kid and I had, like, or like the stereotypical child who has his blankie. And it's like, so, like, when you see it, or if you saw it in isolation, without the context of this kid, you would just think it's a tattered rag. But the amount of value that this blankie has, I think I've got a picture for that. The amount of value that this blankie has is immense. It's, for a child too, it's just unfathomable how important this little tattered piece of cloth can be to a child. So the power of place is very powerful because of this intangible value. And so people have been investing meaning and value into space for a long time, and I actually feel very strongly that placemaking is a process that is intrinsic. It's part of who we are. It's inherent in our lives. It's inherent in the human being, and on all of life. And so placemaking has kind of been going on all over the world in all sorts of forms. This first image is kind of just like it's like the iconic place of, like, for the scope of Western civilization. It's like probably in Italy. And it's like just this location, and there's people gathering, it's an openness, it's civic. So this is when people think of place, they think of, like, or placemaking, it's like this, the romantic placemaking. But placemaking has been taking place throughout the ages and civilizations, and it's been used for different reasons. I think one thing that I've noticed within city repair is that we're kind of isolated in our references of what placemaking is. And so most of us just talk about, like, oh, tell me about placemaking. You'll be like, oh, this site that's in Portland, and like this site that's in Portland. But placemaking goes on in all cultures, all over the place. And I think as a placemaker, it's really important to become fluent and knowledgeable about the different ways in which people express themselves in their environment. Because it's more about the appropriate adaptation rather than a universal one-size-fits-all form. So all sorts of cultures investing their own particular value in their environment. This is a really beautiful example. This is a temple in southern India. And it looks really fancy from afar, but if you look even closer, you realize that the entire building is like a giant story. And all of their deities are just covered in this, reenacting the stories of their myths and their ancestors. And so this entire location is just a huge collage of nothing but value and meaning to this culture. And they can use it as like a symbol of who they are. They can use it as a way to share their tradition with future generations, all sorts of things. But as I mentioned earlier, it's not just like a human fad. All creatures all over the place are turning just the situation they have into a better situation that's tailored to their own experience. There's a BBC series called Life, and it looks at different types of animals in each series, and one of them is on birds. There's this very fascinating section where they look at this one bird's very curious mating ritual, in which all the males spend all this time doing all this. They make this nest, and then they spend weeks gathering all these, like, each bird like identifies with like 6 different materials, like mushrooms, red leaves, and this purple flower, and like that's what they like, or like goat poop. Like, I love, and so they just go out and they collect all of who they are, like all the things they identify with, and they make this beautiful display. And when the female goes around to each nest, they get impressed and they connect with the bird. They're like kind of sharing who they are.
They're called bowerbirds.
Bowerbirds, yes. It's so fascinating, and it's so like pointless, but it's so meaningful at the same time. Or termites, who another BBC series called Life in the Undergrowth. There's a series on super societies, and termites are a super society, and they create these nests that are more than just weird structures, but they're designed to. They have these like ventilation shafts so that when air passes through them, it sucks hot air from within the tunnels and pumps new oxygen into the depths and cools the place at the same time. So fascinating things. Placemaking is something that's like been going on forever. I feel that this is the reason why I can be so strong about it, is because I'm not trying to like sell something to people. Like when we're talking about placemaking, we aren't trying to give them something they don't have. We're trying to tell people to really become who they are and really express themselves and fulfill themselves as human beings. And it kind of ties into this theory of the Gaia hypothesis, which is this possibly strange and still controversial idea that life is kind of functioning as this collective organism that are all together, and all the organisms as individuals are collectively working to make their environment more hospitable and more enjoyable place to live. And placemaking is kind of like the driving force behind how that works, is everyone's trying to make their environment more hospitable to themselves. But with all of what placemaking could be and has been, this is kind of what it's become. And this is where we step in. We see this and we get like really scared. Like, this is what's happened to the crossroad. This is what's happened to nature. It's like a mannequin of nature. And then this is what's happened to cultural expression. It's like Jafar's tower is basically just like a Julius Caesar's like Jamba Juice. So this is this strange facade of culture. Interestingly, lots of people go to malls for the social experience, especially like kids and teenagers will come here because this is where everyone gathers. This is like the village. It's just that the values now, so we've said that like a place is invested with value. So there are values, but now we need to start discerning what type of values we want to promote and what type of values we don't care for anymore. So there are a lot of values in this type of placemaking that I find unacceptable. And then other forms of simple placemaking would be like parks and recreation. Very conventional, traditional form. You make a park, it's nice, people can recreate. Totally good. The values of these types of place would be income. It would be like the transmission of social norms and status quo and consumerism, things like that, things that they want to share. These are the values that you find in this place, buying things and not really looking deeper than the surface. But we said at the beginning that we can use placemaking as a powerful tool to heal deep wounds and challenges in society. So in order for us to do that, we need to find placemaking that has a different set of values. And so the values that we're looking for in the type of placemaking that we're beginning to define would be values such as personal expression, empowerment, overcoming challenges and finding harmony within diversity, acceptance. All these like cool things are kind of like you take ethics and morals and good things and you add it on, like we should be doing with everything, to how we develop our cities, and then you get really good placemaking. But there's another thing that's added to this. But before I talk about that, I just want to note that graffiti, and in a sense vandalism, is often a very peculiar form of placemaking, in that people are trying to express themselves. They're trying to share who they are, but no one else was involved, and in many cases other people did not approve, and it comes from this place of usually anger or negativity. But it is placemaking nonetheless, and that's a very important distinction to make, because you can stop looking at it as something that you need to get rid of and start looking at it as something that needs to be appreciated and nurtured and guided. And then you get cool applications where it becomes accepted and it's no longer vandalism. And that street painting initially in Selwood that we talked about last week, that was, to some people considered vandalism, but the fact that so many people were involved made it change. The values shifted. So this is the kind of placemaking that we would be doing. Creative community building in the public right-of-way. This is our guidebook, by the way. It's available. So not only are we shifting the values of placemaking, but in this work that City Repair has done, the Village Building Convergence, and that we're talking about throughout these series, is this collaborative placemaking. And that's a very important adjective to add to it. As we said last week, it is totally healthy, acceptable, and good to engage in placemaking by yourself. It's just more fun when other people are involved. And then there are some really interesting benefits that result when you have multiple people engaging in placemaking at the same time collaboratively and creatively. And there are different types of benefits that come from this. And some of them are direct, like you get a bench, you get art, you get a garden, you get a board. So that's like the direct benefit of placemaking. You make things. But then there are possibly more interesting emergent benefits that come that you wouldn't necessarily directly connect with the creation of a bench. But you have people working together for so long, and they start developing trust and other cool little things. And then you get these emergent benefits of taking down fences and becoming stronger friends and feeling a deeper sense of safety at night while you're sleeping, or all these other things that kind of emerge and aren't directly related to the physical thing that you did. And these are actually, I would say, most of our long-term goals for what we want to accomplish are the emergent benefits that come out of placemaking. The tendency for people who start creating cool things in their environment develop an interest and a concern for the well-being of that environment and the people they're working with, all of a sudden find themselves in a situation where they say, what if something went wrong? What would we do? Now that I realize you're all so important to me and there's so much value I'm getting from everyone around me, what happens if there's a crisis situation? What happens if there's emergency? How can we start to support each other? It's interesting how often conversations that start with street paintings end with conversations that talk about resiliency and preparedness. So a lot of these emergent goals are actually the ones that we really want to attain, and I think we still have a lot to do before we start to really see those in the projects that we're supporting. Possibly more often than not, a lot of the placemaking projects that I've either heard, read about, or seen end up lasting for just a couple years. Then something happens and they kind of fall apart and fade away, and a lot of the projects just kind of start to dissolve. So we get these direct benefits for a while, but we're still trying to figure out how to really seize and take hold and really make healthy, long-lasting placemaking sites. I think that's still something that we're trying to understand as community placemakers. And to give an example of the intangible values that we spoke about earlier, this is a beautiful specific project where this bench is a memorial site. It's a place to sit, so you get this place as somewhere you can sit. And people say, oh, it's nice, it's so good to have, it's an asset to have places to sit here, or to have pleasurable things to view. But this is a memorial to a community member who was hit and killed by a truck on his bicycle at that intersection. And the pieces of his bike and memories of his life have been embedded into this place. So that's like investing and infusing a location with value and meaning. And the emergent values that come out of that are a sense of people actually living in an environment. Like you go to a city and you're like, oh, the people are actually living here. It's not just like this large computer grid, or like you don't just see all these like robots running around. It's like this is a place where things have happened, where people have lived and died, and people have been loved, and people have been cared about. And that creates creates this deeper connection. So we do placemaking. Oh, these are kind of we're using placemaking, and we're working with placemaking for the direct and emergent benefits. We're engaging in placemaking to foster these intangible values in our world around us. And I would think that one of the biggest things, like, because if you're in activism, or you have eyeballs and ears and like a brain,
that you're using.
Yeah. Yes. Good. You think that at some point you think about the bigger picture, and like, how does my individual efforts and actions work towards a greater solution that's going to have long-lasting results? I often think about that, and it's like, spend so long, you're like in college, and you're like, I can only do something if it's going to be like all the way, like highest first. So how does placemaking fit into all of that? Like, is placemaking the best thing ever possible? I feel like that placemaking is an incredible stepping stone that we need to be taking in order to be able to be in a position where we can start making really good, long-lasting, large-scale solutions to the challenges we're facing. In that, most of us, including myself, are ill-equipped to face and handle the challenges that we are actually experiencing right now, but are largely being very successful at ignoring. We are not capable of even fathoming a lot of the challenges. And placemaking gets you out of ignorance, it gets you out of your own little isolation, and it gets you into this arena where you are starting to develop the skills of communication, the skills of decision making, the skills of planning, and the skills of trust and responsibility that we're going to need if we're going to want to start making large-scale solutions, which are inevitably going to require lots of people working together. There's not going to be like some one person who just comes in and like saves us all. Like, that hero is going to be 1,000 people combined into one functioning group. Like, the myth of that superhero that's going to be like read about 1,000 years from now is really going to be thousands and thousands of people. And this process of placemaking will build up the capacity within individuals and within groups to function more effectively and to function more good.
More better.
Stepping stones, very important. So, like, the context of things, making benches and making street paintings really isn't going to reduce all of our pollution, but it's going to prepare us to be able to do it. And more importantly, I completely didn't forget about this. The most important ingredient for like anything in sustainability is joy. Like, nothing is going to be sustainable if there's not joy. And so placemaking is about establishing this just expectation of joy in the things we do in life. Very important. Oh, next week I'll bring this academic paper that Cyd Manro wrote about intersection repair and its ability to reverse urban blight in social isolation. People who downloaded things, you've got some documents by this professor who was a board member of City Repair, who studied inner city epidemics such as heat waves and attributed most of the challenges and fatalities to social isolation. And he was kind of the one who instigated the Sunnyside Piazza and wrote some really cool academic papers which give a lot of cred to the work that we're doing.
Do you think that it's on Google Scholar?
Some of them are. Cyd Manro.
Nice.
I was referring to this lady named Jan for the longest time. A male from Sweden named Jan. So, this is not being recorded.
It is.
It is.
Sorry, Jan. Looks like Jan. I grew up in
And that was
Iowa.
placemaking.
This week's recommendation for TED Talks would be James Howard Kunstler's as he dissects suburbia.
Very intense.
He wrote a book called A World Made by Hand, which is an interesting post-apocalyptic world. But this is
Which there's a meetup group based
Oh,
on
really?
called Made by Hand here in Portland, which is pretty accurate.
so he swears, which is also cool, but he just
A
gets
lot.
really cynical and just kind of
Angry.
but in like a good cathartic way about how ridiculous the situation is.
Highly recommend.
Yeah, really great. This actually was like a good precursor to me getting interested or finding value in placemaking.
Yeah. He also wrote a great book called Geography of Nowhere,
Yeah,
talking about suburbia. Yeah.
very fascinating. He explains suburbia and the social isolation condition in very good ways. Thanks, words. Okay, we're cruising right along. We're totally gonna make it.
And I want 5 minutes.
Okay, we will be able to do that because we're making such good time. Let me see if I missed anything. Benefits of community involvement. Oh, it's really good. I don't know if I emphasize it enough. The community aspect and the process aspect of placemaking is probably the most important thing to me. I'll start with me. I won't be as presumptuous as say all of City Repair and everyone, but what separates one of the board members, used to be board member of City Repair, explained it very well. He said that placemaking is a vehicle and a catalyst for community growth. Having a bench does not mean you have community. That's really important. This is something that a lot of people will mistake because they're really used to this society that we have today in which you have your thing and you take your add-on and you just plug it in. You know, it's like you have a problem and gadgets are the solution. Or smear. You know, you just like smear this on and it's fixed. Or like, you know, infomercial style. We're really used to that. We've got this problem and we buy something and add it. And we don't change anything because we don't want to. But placemaking is a process and it's a catalyst for growth. And when I talk to like kids, I explain that like well, actually I can't even do that anymore. I try to and they don't get it. But it's like a Tamagotchi. It's like a little pet. Like community is something that you have to nurture and take care of and like sweep the poop off of and like it's something that's like living, even though it's not like a species. Community is a living organism that needs fuel and maintenance and love. And so you can't just smear something, you can't just plop in a bench or paint something a certain color and have community. This process, it's kind of like life is a journey, not a destination. So this process of placemaking is itself like the catalyst. And a lot of the emergent benefits that we want to see, like responsibility and trust and personal growth, comes out not of like sitting in a bench, but the process of deciding to build a bench and then how we're going to make it and how we're going to fund it and how I'm going to get over my differences with this person so that I can ask them if they'll like lend me some like nails and hammers so that we can put the roof up. Like it's that all those things that just emerge out of the process of having to work with other people creatively. It's a catalyst, puts us in this environment where we are most likely to experience the growth that we want to experience and the changes that we want to see. So I've tried to take a lot of the ideas that I've observed at placemaking sites and when people have talked to me about placemaking into a handful of principles, and some of them weren't like necessarily principles, but they're like focuses, like things to keep in mind. So we'll go through them, and after that we'll have the time for some questions about everything. And then we'll keep talking. So the first person, this was actually more geared towards when I was speaking to other cities, and in many cases people from the city or city leaders or community leaders or people who were in a community that they felt detached from significantly and were unsure where to start. So this is like good advice if people are like, hey, you're a placemaker, like what do I do in my own city? How do I get things started? Supporting local leaders is an incredible way to start. And a local leader is someone, not like necessarily a political leader, but someone who has a strong, well, I guess in some ways like the word would be like clout, like they're known in that community, influence, and then the keywords were intuition and connection. Someone who just knows deeply and just personally about the environment that they're living in, what the people want, what the challenges are, what they value, and then who have friends and are, it's like you're not trying to like just suck money from people. It's like you have the people who are like, they have already established trust. That's really what it comes down to. Local leaders who have influence because of established trust. Work with them. Don't try and start new things and like try and get everybody in a community to like join you. Either start by yourself or connect with other people who have influence and intuition in the environment. This is a pretty simple one, and kind of when we do our week on social stuff, like social capital and community asset mapping, it becomes very apparent that it is very useful to look first for the resources around you, for the skill sets around you. And I even have this I have this romantic version of placemaking in which a group of people sit together and they first make a list of all of the resources and skills they have available to them, and then have this goal to do everything that they can do using only those resources. It's just like this little closed environment. And one that develops this this conception about how much we need other people and how insufficient our own resources can be, but then also how to engage resources that aren't traditionally deemed as valuable. That's like super important. Finding creative ways, because this is creative and collaborative placemaking, creative ways to engage and nurture skills that aren't traditionally deemed valuable, like people who unicycles or people who collect bugs or all things that I really respect and appreciate, but wouldn't be normally like deemed as useful to an urban planner. So people who are sailors or trumpet players or seamstresses, like how to find, like what would happen if you're like you had a sailor and a seamstress and a tuba player, and like with our skills combined, what would we create? Like what would our bench look like? What bench would meet our needs? That's going to be fascinating. So focusing on local resources and skills is a really interesting way to go. And on top of that, you then want to like start how to like who are the first people that you network with. But this week we touched on already. It's a journey. It's a catalyst. It's a vehicle. Often this would be another very common fatal blow to a placemaking process if people try and just rush to the end and build something because they really want to have it. That's another traditional value, is rushing to completion and kind of neglecting the process. But as we said before, the skills you're going to need to save the world are not going to be gained from a bench. It's going to be gained from figuring out how to build the bench when none of you are builders. Like that's the kind of creative problem solving that we need. And the beautiful thing about placemaking is it really doesn't necessarily matter what you build. Like, that's the cool part. We usually don't really care, or we definitely don't tell people what it is they should build. That's another reason why I really like placemaking, is I never have to tell people what to do. I try and just encourage them to, I persuade them to do what they want to do, even if they think other people will think it's crazy. That's probably the best part as a placemaker. Most of the time you just go around and people say, I've got this really crazy idea, I really don't think it's possible, but I've always really wanted to do this, and your like main priority is just to say like, yeah! You know, that's like 99% of what being a placemaker. That's what I've found. Don't rush the process. Please don't. And that's really, it can be very difficult. This is actually, it's the most obvious in the beginning, but when you're really in the thick of an argument, it can be like you really want to do it. It's so counterintuitive to just linger. Especially, it's like, it's those moments where you commit to overcoming differences that growth really occurs. Don't rush. I think we've established that. This one's still kind of like this, I'm still trying to really just find a really concise way to explain this. So I've used a bunch of confusing words that only make sense when I explain it, and possibly not even then. And it's also the combination of two different ideas. And one of them is that there's this idea that people feel involved when you make the effort to involve them sincerely. And when people feel involved, they start to develop an appreciation. They start to value whatever they're being involved in. You know, a huge problem in society today is minorities and small groups being neglected, being left out, not being heard, not having a voice. And that creates, you know, there's so little respect for society when you're in a group of people that are not appreciated. And that's kind of led to some of the most beautiful, like, stories in city repair. Would be all these situations in which there was this idea that was created, and it was presented to this group, and there were these people who did not resonate with it. And within a normal paradigm, they would either be bought out or pushed out. You know, like, how much do we have to pay you to let us build this here? Or, you know, you've been deemed not mission critical, and therefore your input is not needed. It's like, that's usually how it happens, and that's like a lot of challenges. Like in the Lent neighborhood, they're trying to put in this big ballpark, and it's like they're really trying to say, like, how much do we have to pay you? How much like parking spaces do we have to make for you guys to be okay with this? With placemaking, you like flip that upside down, and you're saying like, how can we collectively reshape my initial idea so that it is an idea that is owned by all of us? And that's one of the big paradigms of placemaking in a collaborative and a community-oriented fashion, is that you start with your own passion, and when you share it with people, this is all going to kind of conclude when we talk about mythology and storytelling, but you have this situation in which people are going to come to you with different opinions, and sometimes you say, this opinion's valid, this one's not, we can use this and we can't use this. There's this situation in which you could be like, what if we try to include the desires of the tuba player and the sailor simultaneously? And how could we use creativity, and this is where creativity becomes like paramount, how do we use creativity to make that work? You know, scientifically they say it can't be done, but we're not going to let that stop us. We're really creative people. So we're being amenable, we're being changeable, receptive to changing, and that will enable more people to feel included. And many times you can have people who are initially very apprehensive or even like negatively resisting something, and there have been these turnaround stories, which hopefully we'll get to, where people become incredible proponents, having the opportunity to be heard and be included. And most of the time, that's like the main problem that anyone has. They try and mask what their problems are with all of these different reasons, and like, you know, it's this one little thing, but really there was this own personal thing where they didn't feel valued. And it can be just like that act of listening that will turn things around. So, and then also starting, oh yeah, so then the other thing that I piled onto that was that not only do you want to be like receptive to all these ideas, but you really want to focus on ideas within the community. And that, once again, feels really intuitive, but there's so many places, even like really big places that have been made in cities that are supposed to be totally about that city, that have been designed by people in like countries or states away that have never even lived there, or like I said, like or just can't even like hug another person, or are so disconnected from that, like not only themselves, but even more that own environment. So really like focus on ideas that the people have around there, and whatever results is going to be much more harmonious and in tune with the laws of nature of those people and that culture. So, big one. This is the same thing. Stepping stones. This is something that's wrestled with a lot during our village building convergence when communities are like trying to figure out what do they want to do. Like they've got these grand visions and they're so amazing, and we say yes, but then we're like, but start small. And that's kind of finding. There's two things that you need to balance when doing placemaking. I think there's probably more than two. Two of the big things are the amount of responsibility that a project will require, and then the amount of effort that it's going to require. If you have a project that is too simple or doesn't create enough lasting responsibility, people will lose interest in it. They won't have this sense of importance in it. It'll be nothing. If it's too big and difficult, technically difficult, or requires way too much maintenance, or like it's way too susceptible to vandalism, then people are just going to get overwhelmed and disheartened, and they're going to just be completely demoralized and just abandon it because it's too difficult for them to like emotionally deal with. So it's a very challenging thing. Oftentimes there's a lot of trial and error and kind of just like calibrating what a community needs. And that's another thing that why a local leader is very powerful, because they'll be like, where are people in this community? Like, where is my community at? Like, what can we handle? And knowing that the first thing you build is most likely to lead towards another thing, and that if the first step is successful, you're more likely to want to take the second step. So totally stepping stones. It's a process. And so this would be an example like where communities are really interested in doing a street painting, but the logistics of that actually start to stack up. And it gets pretty difficult, and it's a big commitment, even though it's just paint. So a lot of them will just start with chalk painting. Because, as we said, so many of the values are not even in the physical piece. They don't actually, reflect to the end result, but are more of a process. And so if you look at what goes into making this painting, it's like you could chart out all the steps that it took the community to do a chalk like this, and then to do an actual street painting, and you might not even be able to tell the difference of what their end result was, because they were still gaining the same values. There's a bit less risk, but in many cases when you're beginning, that's exactly what you want. You can still get all of the communication, all of the learning, and all of the working together with these smaller projects. So don't think that bigger projects are necessarily better. It's really what goes on in here that counts. Designing for connection. Connection on many different levels. Designing for connection. Structures these days are often designed for egos. There's like this huge, I don't know if it's still going on now, and I don't know if I can actually make legitimate commentary on architecture in the modern world, but you see a lot of this iconic architecture. It's like almost it's so big that you just feel dwarfed, and it's just like the ego of this architect is trying to just like stomp everything around them, and that's very prominent. I guess it's a very typical power move. It's like you just create this thing that is designed to disempower or inflate, or things are designed to impossibly things are designed like as we saw with the grid. Part of its design was to separate people. So we're saying like, what if this is another definition of placemaking, is designing places to connect and unite people. So what if we could design for connection? What if within the design process we didn't just think about like how we could sit on it, but more than that, like how could we design it to be most meaningful? What would make this bench more meaningful to me? That's like the step. It's like I want to make a bench, let's make it better. Like what more could it be? And then that's part of the creative. And then the other one we often encourage. These are like the three things that I encourage when I tell people like when you're designing your thing, make it as meaningful as possible, make it as creative as possible. Don't build boring things, please don't. We have enough. Make it creative, and then make it ecological. Make it aware of and sensitive to and nourishing to its environment around it. So this was an example of there was this meaning and that they were paying tribute to the cultures that existed on this land before the school existed. They were creative in that they were facing these problems with permitting this roof structure, and they were going to need to get this really expensive engineer to sign off on it because the roof was too large. So they found this weird little loophole that if they made 7 small roofs, then it wouldn't trigger any of those requirements to be permitted by an engineer. So it was really creative design, and then they had this whole garden that goes along with it. So by sitting in this bench, you automatically pay more attention to the garden around it, and they grow like Jerusalem artichokes in there. So along the lines of designing to connect people with their environments, you can also design for growth. You can design structures that in their final product, and probably more importantly, what we've really started to latch on is designing projects that will engage and bring people together during their creation. We've found that that is usually the most empowering part. Actually having a street painting in your intersection, like 364 days of the year, is not that empowering. Like, it's nice, and people will compliment it, and you can look outside and you're like, oh, like I made that. But you're really remembering that one day in which you painted it, and how growthful that experience was. And so oftentimes, like, a lot of placemaking that goes on in Portland involves natural building. And there are all these ecological and sustainable living values for natural building that are super relevant. But interestingly, when our main priority is this creative community growth, natural building all of a sudden has all these other benefits that aren't necessarily talked about or thought about. And the fact that it's a really usually inefficient process, that it takes a lot of time and manual labor, but all of a sudden what would be like a downside to the craft becomes this incredible advantage when you're like, oh my god, I've got like 70 kids and they need to be entertained with something that's simple to do, that's not going to poison them, and it's going to be fun, and they can have a part in it. Like, how am I going to do that? And all of a sudden, making a massive cob bench is like the perfect thing. They literally get to make something with mud. Like, and so you think like, what does my community need, and how can I design this project to really engage the people to the fullest degree? And so sometimes that's painting, sometimes that's structural, sometimes that's agricultural, and that's another thing. That's like that observation and intuition is like, what type of activity would bring the most people together? Or how can we hybridize all of these activities and make like this really artistic bench that also has gardens all over it? And then you like bring in everyone, and has like tubas sticking out of it. Yeah. That's another great one. Having professionals be supporters and teachers. This is often like what you need to like share, like when you bring in a professional, because many times you will be bringing in professionals to placemaking projects for safety and for like the high probability that your investment will actually end up with something that's valuable. That is, it's always, I downplay the end result often, but it's also it's nice to end up with something that's really nice, because then you can tell stories about it, which we'll also get to later. And that's like the whole other cycle of placemaking. So when we've got this village building convergence and we bring in professionals to help placemaking sites, there's a strong idea that they're not there to just build and boss. They're there to share their knowledge in an effort to make that community more sustainable and more capable. To ultimately accomplish their desires by themselves, which is kind of the definition of increasing social capital, is finding ways to take the capacity of a community presently and increase their ability to accomplish their desires. That's like 2 weeks from now, but so you're bringing in teachers and professionals as assistants and as sharers of knowledge. Second to last one. These last 2 ones are kind of like would go on like Hallmark cards or something like that. This is a really helpful one when you're getting really frustrated with trying to accomplish our goals, or like with lots of things, is that in the same way that seeds want to grow, they're like biologically designed to grow and prosper. it appears very surely to me that we are designed to connect and become stronger together. We are social creatures, and it is in our pure interests. We can find ways to become perverted and twisted, but it is in our pure interest to come together and work together. And it's going to happen. So like we're hardwired to do it. We're very capable of doing it. We really, with placemaking, want to create an environment that will just let it happen. We're making this, like, you know the seed's going to grow, so as a gardener, your goal isn't to make the seed grow. You know, many natural, like organic farmers or folks who study permaculture see themselves as soil growers. Like, they're not growing plants. Like, they're creating the bed and the environment in which the seeds are going to have the best chance. So as placemakers, we're not trying to create community, and we're not trying to create something specific. We're trying to create that environment that is going to be most likely for that to happen. And so like with painting, it's just like you're giving people these simple things to do. They're creatively enlivened. And the fabrics of community naturally weave themselves. It really happens. There's this book that my dad showed me when I was young called Awakening the Corporate Soul. And he said, interestingly, if you cross out corporate every time it appears in the book and replaced with community, it's a really great community building book. I thought that was very fascinating. I mean, ultimately, it shows you something about the deeper truths of what a corporation is, and then just how far it's gone from what it should be. And they said that, actually, he was then like taking this, like, so he was talking about this spiritual growth, and he was saying that enlightenment is by and large an accidental occurrence. You don't see many people saying, I'm going to get enlightened this way, and then like, boop, just some happen. So it's like, so he says, enlightenment is by and large an accident, but there are things we can do to make ourselves more accident prone. So these street paintings are like creating this like community particle accelerator, in which you can't really determine which little like subatomic particles are going to hit, but you're just getting them going fast enough with enough of them, enough times, and eventually someone's going to collide and make friends, and then babies, and then more neighbors. So you're creating this, like you just have all these people painting and they're running around and they're trying their hardest to be isolated and not talk with people, but eventually they're gonna both like reach for a brush at the same time. And then that's like that spark happens, and then they're making place together. And so the last one is that community is the foundation, and this answers, or this is the principle that resonates with what like I initially tried to say, which was that water the root. There's this other saying from ancient India, and they talk about the quest for pure knowledge, and they say, know that by knowing which all is known. And they're talking about like their literature, their spiritual literature. And if you understand that, then you can be awakened to the knowledge of everything. So in the same way, you can support this level of society by supporting which all just kind of becomes supported from that. It's like the tree being systemically nourished by watering the root. And so that's what we can not necessarily, we can remain in a way unfreaked out by the huge challenges that we're facing, knowing that we are addressing it on a deeper level, which leaves more opportunity for joy, more opportunity for, well, actually, that's the main thing. All the other things are more superficial than joy, and that's just a really beautiful picture. Like, think about what this kid, the experience this kid is having, and what that's going to teach them as they grow up in their life, and the choices that they're going to make. That was like one of the big things I really started to make. Is like, for placemaking, for all the crazy things that are going on in the world, all these decisions, like you see these people doing these things to the entire world, and you're like, how can they live with themselves? Like, how can they do that? How can they make that decision? When you have people in this fertile environment that they're growing up in and they're experiencing, how are they going to make those decisions? Like, how are they going to, where is there going to be room for the hate and the pain to allow them to make damaging decisions? If you can create this environment that's fully saturated with value and meaning, then that's what we're going to grow from. Like that's what we're going to read. That's what we're going to learn. That's what we're going to experience. And that's what's going to guide the choices and actions that we make.